Cool. So happy Monday, everybody. It is July 15th, and this is the OpenJS Security Collab space. The agenda today is regarding how to best present and organize the security standards guidelines that we've developed um, onto GitHub. And to kind of review the discussion so far, first off, let me find the link. Uh, to start off, there was Ulysses in a previous meeting showed us a prototype that he kind of put together, and I'll drop the link here. That prototype is imperfect. It's definitely just a first shot. Um, and one of the nice things about it is that as a one-off, it goes and has a script that manually, a script that goes through and pulls all of the information out of Google Workspace. So the Google Sheet and the Google Doc that were originally used to build this up, and it puts it into Markdown. There's some issues with how this is presented, and there's no need to go through like the specifics on like this particular implementation. But one of the concerns that came up was the way that it was organized in the back end in Markdown for maintenance. And that was the big concern that came up along the way is how once we put this, how do we put this into Markdown for consumption? And also how do we do that in a way that it enables good, healthy maintenance and updates rather than creating a disincentive to go and do those to go and the maintain it in GitHub. So to kind of discuss also another concern, there was given very the current guidelines are very much based upon being in an Excel a spreadsheet. And obviously, we don't have that support in Markdown. And so instead, it needs to be put into some other format that is easily consumed, easily viewed, that is not a spreadsheet, which is a challenge also to itself. And then there was a third part about whether or not the primary way that we should optimize for the information actually being presented and consumed by folks, whether it's in actually in GitHub Markdown or whether or not it's in some sort of um, website instead that kind of resolves some of the issues of showing things in GitHub Markdown. So with that, I'd love to just open the floor to any thoughts or commentary on um, y'all's views on what you would like to see out of how this gets put into GitHub and how it should be presented.
I think the discussion we had last week about putting the benefits of having this in GitHub, being able to track changes, all that good stuff. Yeah, Google Sheets is, I mean, I do love some spreadsheets, but I think for this purposes, I think there was pretty universal agreement that like GitHub was the way to go for all the right reasons.
Thanks, Ben. Chris?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely agree with Ben's comments. And I don't know. I feel like I'm at risk of repeating myself from previous meetings. You kind of outlined some of the feedback that I've had as well earlier, Rudd. But yeah, I think if like focus on Markdown first. And when I say Markdown first, I don't mean just like chronologically. I mean like prioritize Markdown first. Like make it good in Markdown, make it consumable in Markdown, make it and that'll lend itself to the easy editability. And then transforming the markdown into HTML format and stuff like that for alternative ways to display that may be a little more, I don't know, user friendly, although Markdown should be, is designed to be human readable in its source format as well as being rendered into HTML, which is usually how you see it in GitHub. And I think that will go a long way because yeah, the more friction that folks have to that is involved in making updates, the higher likelihood that it's going to not get updated. Again, these are things that you already kind of spoke to. And you know, Ulysses, who is unfortunately not here, you know, did take some time and write some scripting to transform the Excel sheet into Markdown and then into like a particular flavor of Markdown. It wasn't standard Markdown. It was something else that had like more bells and whistles or something. I think it allows you to use like JSX. Um, uh, Whether that's the shape of what the thing is, I don't know. I think it's great to have something that can take, you know, what's there in the spreadsheet and automatically transform it for at least the initial version, which is great because that's a lot of manual copy pasting and potentially mistakes that we're making trying to do that manually. But I think whether we use that or not, it's just a matter of getting the resulting markdown the way that we want it to look. And then the question of, I think the biggest question right now is really just the organization of the content. That in my mind, that's like the biggest thing is how we organize it. We talked about a couple of different ways of, you know, displaying the information for consumers so that like the most important things or the easiest things to implement start at the top and then it gets maybe progressively harder, um, uh, more advanced, shall we say, versus like organizing it by category. I don't, or you could do both. You could have two different presentations, but then that introduces its own problems. So, but again, yeah, the organization of the content is the big piece in my mind.
So when we talk about organization, um, the sense that I get is from poking around at what OpenSSF has done, poking around at what others have done. There's really kind of two overall conceptual approaches here, and that is to have the one that is the easiest by far is to have one big long file, and you scroll through it, and if we do an awesome sauce job, there are self-referencing links within it for when it's presented in GitHub so that you can click around it a little bit and move through the document without having to keep scrolling up and down. This is the approach that CNCF has taken for the most part with their white papers. Um, but having been a consumer of those while building the standards, I would say that approach was even with self-referencing links, which they didn't have so much of. Um, I found to be very challenging to use, being a really digging into it and living in the document for quite a while. The other approach is to have some sort of index list, and then that list then goes and links to much smaller one-off files um, for each individual guideline. Another thing that is a variant of that I was wondering was whether or not to have a main kind of listing index, but rather than having individual guideline entries be their own files, instead we create just a file for each priority group instead. And that way there are fewer files, and that way there's still information is still presented together while at the same time not being like super crazy long, like having everything in one document. So that's kind of like a little bit of a hybrid approach. Um, given that we have 72 entries, that's one of my concerns on having individual files for everything, versus the opportunity to group them up. But yeah, I'd like to get your all's thoughts on those three, or if there are others that I'm missing. Ben?
Yeah, I think we should keep first and foremost the outcome of making this digestible and usable by the projects.
Hmm.
Um, and like I was just reflecting on I do some onboarding work these days where I'm working with various projects, and there's a checklist for them to graduate OpenJS, right? And this includes things like adding a footer, having the charter, things like that. Um, and what I've realized is that the projects are not particularly well versed in what those things are. They don't have a lot of the context. And I really need to tell them exactly what to do and sometimes to hold their hand, right? And I think we should just accept that that's probably going to be the same case for some of the security things. And so that the most trying to come up with a very short, easy to consumable checklist for projects with the option of going deeper if they want to is probably the way that we're going to accomplish our goal of getting these to actually be implemented.
Dan, what is that in your mind? What does that visually look like to you when you say that? I
Visually, I
guess.
think it's the first thing we do is we identify what items from our guidelines are requirements, right? Are absolutely, like, if you're an OpenJS Foundation project, you need to have these things, right? And then, we have sort of that tiered list. And each of those items you can click on, and there's like a very, hopefully, easy to follow, like, here's the things you need to do. 1, 2, 3, right? So someone that hasn't been in these meetings, someone that doesn't have all this context, can really understand like what they need to do and what it looks like if they're done. Like, what does done mean for these things?
Chris.
Yeah. Um, I think that's good feedback from Ben. Actually, I like that. Couple of things, rewind slightly. So first of all, I think I like your hybrid approach. If I was understanding what you were saying correctly. Um, and I think I mentioned this before, where like the most expensive churn, if we don't like something about the content, is where we have split things out in a directory structure very granularly. Because then if we don't like it, so the reason I like your hybrid one, if you say like there's how many sections there are, I don't remember if there's 5, 10, or 15, but like if there's that many files, and so everything is in there, that's a much easier thing to move from if we wanted to than an individual file for each thing. So I think it's a nice I like it because, I've said this before, like, crawl, walk, run, right? We'd start, do the thing in this shape, and then we can iterate on it. So I like that. Ultimately, I would like to see, I'm very much top of mind for like what I would like to consume and sort of golden rule and like what I expect others would like to consume. And that being the most sort of intuitive and usable thing. So I definitely want a list, and I do not want large blocks of text interrupting the list. I want to see the high level item, and I want to be able to go into more detail if I need to. But a lot of the high level items, I know exactly what they are. I don't need more detail. I don't need justification. I can see what it is. I can maybe see if it's expected or recommended. Um, and so I think it's really important to have the high level list that's easily scannable, and I can see what everything is. And the other thing is, this goes to the organization, and this I realize this balance might not be as easy as it sounds to strike, but in the same way that I want to see like the easier stuff at the beginning, I also want to see similar things together. I do not want to, because if I'm going through this and I'm taking action on the list, I'm like, oh, let me go and configure this. I don't want to configure thing A and then go 50 items down, and thing B really was something I should have been doing back at thing A. because it's in a similar configuration area or what have you. And that would just annoy the heck out of me. So I also think it's important to have the items grouped, even if some of them may be a little more advanced than others. So more of like a workflow prioritization.
Jordan?
So all of what was just said is stuff that was in my head when I was writing that guide for the best practices badge. The only thing that isn't covered is like the easily scannable list. Um, but that's because I think that the majority of things in that guide and possibly in this 70 item list aren't things that people are gonna know about. I think the vast majority of people aren't going to be as informed as Chris or anyone else in this room, and an easily scannable list is going to be useless for them. That doesn't mean we shouldn't make one, but like because some of these things are no-brainers that they're already going to have done, but most of these things are things that are going to make sense to them, but it wouldn't have occurred to them to do, or they haven't prioritized. And so I wrote that guide. Like I went to the best practices badge site, and it's got like it's sort of a scannable list. It's got like collapsible sections and stuff, and then each thing you can expand more details and right. So it sort of fits in with the philosophy, but it wasn't targeted to JavaScript. And so I basically wrote a narrative in my guide, which was sort of like walking you through it, assuming that you aren't going to read everything on the best practices site, and you want the quickest path to getting the best possible, most accurate score. And so I sort of like walked you through things, and I said, hey, like you'll cover 4 things at once if you do this thing. And when you get down to the 4th thing, it'll be like, oh, you already covered this if you did this up here, right? So, sort of building with that in mind, that even if there's 70 items on the list, that when you get to item number 58, it says you actually already took care of this in item number 14. So keep going, you're good, right? Or something like that. And I'm sure there's, for every n people, there's like n squared numbers of ways you could impart information to them. So I don't think there's any one objectively best way, but I still, I mean, I still am standing behind the decisions I made when I wrote that guide, because it felt like a really good way to keep a developer's interest and attention, while acknowledging that they're not an idiot and that they may already know some stuff, and trying to kind of get as many birds with one stone as possible as they moved along. So I would still advocate for something like that here.
So let me summarize what, based on all the feedback I've heard so far, what this might look like, and then y'all can adjust. And unfortunately, like I mentioned, I have to leave at the top of the hour, so I only have another couple minutes before I have to go. One, there should be an index, and along with that index, there should be some. There should That should also include the information on like how to consume the actual guide itself. The index would organize things by likely the priority group, which is the clumps of work we're saying you should do in this order. Those would link off to files, a file that includes a shorter it list, for for all the guidelines in that priority group. And rather than having those link off to individual files that go into more detail, perhaps we could have like the detail related to each of those, the items in the priority group indexed at the top of the file, and then more detail about each one lower down in the file. Trying to think. Then there is the point on organizing similar things together, which I think would wind up being, given how the priority groups wound up working out, and maybe going back and redoing the priority groups to align to the categories better might make sense. But another view to consider is having things indexed by having another index of things organized by the type of work they are, even if they're not prioritized together. Um, Chris, you have your hand up.
I did, and it was in response to Jordan, but then I was thinking about what you were saying, and now I cannot remember what my response was.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. And I'll if it comes back to me, I will.
Adam, sorry, Red, before you have to go, like, what's the next steps here? Like, what do you want to do next to move this forward?
The thing I would like to get out of this is at least a consensus on the file structure, what information is in what file. So if we have like a main index file, and then the subfiles from there are organized by category or priority group, and then within that within the category or priority group files, there is an index um, of that priority group or category, and then whether or not the information for each of those items is in that same file or in a file is linked off into individual files instead. Because then I can start playing around with format. Like then the question is more of me futzing around with formatting and stuff like that for display. But if we have that fundamental idea in place, then and consensus around those, then I can just get started.
So do you
Chris.
want to present some options and like work asynchronously on getting folks to review, or like how do you want to?
Yeah, I think that's what I was thinking of was taking the results of this conversation and writing them down, and then people can take a look at the idea of here's what it would look like just as like a quick example. Um, and then we can, if people are good with that, then we can go from there. Chris?
Yeah, I remember what I was going to respond to Jordan, which was regarding his point that people looking at it will not necessarily be so familiar with what and they will need the details. So that's true. Definitely there will be those folks. But we should also keep in mind that they're going to be looking at it for the first time at some point, and then every time after that will not be the first time. And so we need to be cognizant, like, are we making them like do a bunch of work to find the information that they're looking for because we've optimized for the first view and not for any of the subsequent views. I don't know that means the shape of that needs to be different, but it's just something to keep in mind. And to the last comments, yeah, I think that like a lot of times the way these things work in our heads aren't what they look like on paper. And so I think actually seeing like a couple of options will go a long way into helping us form opinions on the actual result.
Well, the other thing is it's hard to measure results if we don't know how everyone measures up right now to this list of 70 some items. So like it might also be worth, before trying to tell people to fix it, that we try and take stock of how they're doing already, because then we can see how much progress is being made.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I wonder if we could get a project or two, maybe Jordan's volunteering right now, to see, which items are kind of already there for a project, like which items they could just check off right away automatically, and how many they would not be able to check off right away and would actually have to implement.
Well, we just
I expect that to vary quite a bit across projects, but it'd be nice to get some kind of sampling of that for sure.
we just came from the ecosystem report collab space an hour before this meeting, and the CPC did a heartbeat survey, and then we're following up with this group earlier this morning. It's on our public calendar. We're talking about doing a little sort of focus group interview in addition to some of the publicly available data or data they provide. So we could certainly, it would make sense if we're going to survey projects to kind of pull as much as we can efficiently through that. So
I have to bounce now. Ben, are you okay with continuing to facilitate the discussion, or is this or do we have enough from here? I feel like I have enough to go take a stab at a prototype of this to show you all. So if you're good with that, then if you're good with basically kind of where the conversation is so far, I can gin up a quick demo without going and doing the whole thing, just to kind of illustrate what things would look like potentially. And then we can take it from there. Does that sound good, Chris?
Yeah, that sounds great. I definitely think we're in good shape to do that. I had and continue to have ambitions of throwing something together, but I'm having trouble making the time. We do have some other, at least one other thing we can talk about in your absence. So we could still use the time remaining.
Cool. All right. Well, I'll take the action item to write down what I understand here, what I've heard so far, and take that and push out like a mock-up basically this week. So expect that just to hear from me probably in the next few days on that. I don't think it'll take me very long to show like a quick mock-up of this that we can continue discussing. So awesome. Thank you so much, folks, and have a great week.
Thanks, Red.
Bye.
Whoa, the new Zoom. I don't know if people's Zooms have updated, but like the reactions are like if I do the party, it's like a whole cornucopia of party. Is everybody seeing that, or is it only me?
it's awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Is the clapping similarly? Is it like a ton of? Okay, no, it's still just the
You
one.
can always count on a UI redesign to
Yes.
fix something that nobody
Just
complained
sneak
about.
it in. Yeah, it'd be nice to have options. Like if I just want the corner clap, or whoa, there's lots of rocket. Yeah, so like
Rocket's fun.
you should have like a choice, like the enthusiastic one, or
Well, I
'cause
see
that's
reactions and
kind of a
send with
lot.
effect. So that's with effect. But like this
Oh,
is
okay.
just the
Clapping
straight
does
up
not have an.
reactions.
Oh, okay. The
Oh, with
clapping does
effect.
not have a effect.
That's hilarious.
Balloons?
Unfortunately, you can't pick any emoji, so I can't like send the poop with effect, you know.
But you can just you have
Probably
to
for
be
the
a
best.
little more creative about it.
Probably best you
Right.
don't.
So if we have other stuff to talk about first, that's great. But the other item that I have on there is like administrative in nature, and we don't need to keep recording. Nobody's going to be interested in that. But I want to talk to this group about it. But I think we could stop the recording if we're getting over to that item.
Yeah, before we stop recording, before we started recording, I gave an update on the OECD event. I want to thank the organizers for inviting our organization to participate. Lots of great contacts that'll be following up. We may have a guest speaker, at least one guest speaker attending this group in the future, so we're going to coordinate on that. So an OECD essentially organized the top cybersecurity agency officials to convene in Korea last week. And a lot of the discussion was on open source. So more to come on that.
All right, unless there's anything else before we get to sort of our administrative chat, if there is anything else, speak now or I'll stop recording. Okay, I will stop the recording.